Morning, everyone. My name is Barbara Fuller. As Chair of the Board of Washtenaw County Road Commissioners, I welcome you to this virtual March 16th, 2021 working session of the board. Is Carrie with us this morning?
Yep, I'm here.
Call the roll. Okay, if you call the roll, please, Carrie.
I sure can. Commissioner Barb Fuller.
Present and participating virtually from Manchester, Sharon Township, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Commissioner Rod Green.
Good morning. I am present and participating from Superior Township, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Commissioner Doug Fuller.
Present and participating remotely from Scioto Township, Michigan.
Commissioner Gloria Yamas.
I'm present and I am participating remotely from Pittsfield Township, Washtenaw County.
Commissioner Joanne McCollum.
Present, and I'm participating from Ypsilanti Charter Township.
Cheryl Siddle.
Present.
Matt McDonnell.
Present.
Jim Harmon.
Present.
And Dan Ackerman.
Here.
All right, thank you, Carrie. We have a full agenda today, and I would, at this point, turn it over to our managing director to take us through the items identified.
Sure thing. Good morning. First,
I'm sorry. We start with public participation.
yeah, I was going to hand it over to Emily for public
Okay.
participation. Yep, happy to do that.
Okay.
Emily, if you could walk us through
Our
that.
communications manager. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. There's a few housekeeping items that I want to cover before we start the meeting and before we go to public comment. So during public comment, if you'd like to make a comment, I'll provide instructions for you in a second on how to virtually raise your hand. And you can do this either from your computer or touch tone phone. The chat feature on this meeting is available only as technical support for users on their computer or smartphone. If you're experiencing technical issues with audio or video during the meeting, please submit a comment and I will try to help you troubleshoot. If it's a member of our staff or board, please contact the IT help desk if you're having technical issues during the meeting. The audio and video of this meeting is being recorded, and a link to the video will be posted to wcroads.org in the coming days. And today's meeting agenda is also posted to wcroads.org, and I just put a link in the chat if you want to follow along in the agenda from your computer. And so if we go to public comment, if you would like to make public comment now, we ask that you virtually raise your hand. If you're viewing the meeting from your computer, you want to first make sure that you click join audio, and then you can raise your hand by clicking the participants button at the bottom of your screen and then the raise hand button at the bottom right of your screen. If you dialed into the meeting from your touch tone phone, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. I will unmute participants with raised hands one at a time, and then I'll announce your username or the last 4 digits of your phone number when it's your turn to speak. Is there anybody that would like to make public comment at this time? Commissioner Fuller, there's no one that has a hand raised right now.
Okay, let's try this again. Cheryl, if you would take it away, please, on the agenda. I think we're starting with the Michigan State Police and speed limits.
Yes. So this morning, we are quite fortunate. We have a couple of representatives from Michigan State Police with us today. We have Lance Cook and Greg Camp, and they are here to talk to us about setting speed limits. And that is something that is near and dear to our hearts at the County Road Commission. That is a frequent request that we get, usually, of course, to lower the speed limit. But it's quite an elaborate process that takes place. We certainly value the relationship that we have with Michigan State Police as part of that, and take that responsibility very seriously. But we thought it would be helpful for the board to have a better understanding of exactly everything that goes on behind the scenes as we come to those decisions. So I know that Brent Schlack, our Assistant Director of Engineering, is also with us today. I don't know, Brent, if there's anything else that you want to add before we hand it over to Michigan State Police?
No, Cheryl, I really appreciate Lance and Greg attending today. like you said, it is a very important task that we perform, and we have to do that in with the Michigan State Police and with the township. I'm excited to hear the presentation, so thank you.
All right, well, with that, we'd be happy to hand it over.
All right, great, thank you. Let me get my screen shared here. Can everybody see the screen okay?
Greg, we can see your folder. We can't see your presentation. We can see my documents.
Having a little connectivity issues.
I'd be happy to share my screen too if
you
you're
guys able to hear us?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I don't think it's on our end, but we've been hitting the internet, so we'll proceed as if everything's going to work fine. Just stop us if it gets too glitchy.
Okay, yeah, we still can't see your slides. We can just see your My Documents folder.
Try again.
There we go.
Bingo.
Perfect. For those of you I haven't met before, my name is Lance Cook. I'm lieutenant in charge of the crash reconstruction unit. Ultimately, the one that signs for the director of the state police when we do a TCO. And so and then Greg's going to take you through the process. Yeah, the goal is to reduce the number of crashes. We want to make the road as safe as possible. Sometimes that's counterintuitive. We've been taught since 1974 that slower is always safer. You know, everybody kind of bought into the national energy speed limit mantra that the insurance companies were pushing. We've learned since then that have less variance and have a smoother flow, then it doesn't really matter what the speed is. That'll be safest for travel. Got a little chart here showing you the fatality rate. Obviously, we look at the rate per 100 million vehicle miles traveled when we're looking at crashes rather than the raw numbers, because raw numbers go up or down every year based on the economy mostly. Last year was an anomaly because of COVID and driving patterns changed, but typically what we've seen is a general downward trend since the 1920s when they first started keeping track of vehicles fatalities. And we've gone under 1 per 100 million vehicle miles traveled for the last several years. And Michigan historically is one of the safest states to drive in, which if you talk to drivers from other states, they're not going to see. But Michigan was about the 4th or 5th state to go under 1 death per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. We've consistently been near the top of the pack for safety. This is just a page from the OHSP crash statistics. You guys all have access to that. Again, Michigan's been ahead of the pack as far as safety. Okay, we got some different types of speed zones, and I'll go through the 3 types. And then we'll talk about how the TCO process works. And again, some of you are pretty familiar with it. Others maybe just have a passing familiarity. And then I guess school zones were an important thing for this group. So we'll spend some time on that at the end. So you got speeds that are set by the legislature, speeds that are set through a traffic control order, and then the basic speed law. And there's different ways of breaking this up. We got prima facie speeds, absolute speeds. We got defined speeds and determined speeds. We'll talk mostly.
Greg, we seem to.
Underneath
Greg,
everything is the basic speed law. It says
Greg, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Oh, Greg, You're going in and out a lot. I wonder if you could turn off your video and that might help your feed, just because your audio is going in and out a lot.
Okay, we'll try that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So again, we got the basic speed law underlies everything. That says you have to be able to drive in a manner where you can keep your car under control and to be able to stop in the assured clear distance ahead. That supersedes the other types of speed limits. And so it doesn't matter what number's on the sign. Day like this morning, if 5 is as fast as you can go safely and you're going 10 in the 70 zone and you get involved in a crash, you can be cited for violating basic speed law. The other types of speeds, again, prima facie speeds are what we call worst case scenario speeds. Those are set up for places like business districts. Prima facie, it's a Latin word pronounced prima facie in Latin. It means first face. It's usually translated as on its face or at first glance. And it sets up a presumption that the number on the sign is the safe and reasonable speed for those worst case scenario conditions that are assumed to be present. But like any presumption, there's a rebuttal ability in that if you've got, say, a business district on a Sunday morning when the businesses are closed, there's no on-street parking. So now you got twice as much pavement width. You got no pedestrian traffic. Maybe the lights in the area are blinking instead of cycling. Person might be able to successfully argue that 35 or 40 or even higher was safe and reasonable because the conditions that presume the 25 zone were not present. And so most of the speed limits under 627 are prima facie limits. The other type, 55, your statewide 70 for the state and county roads. And then anything that's modified downward from that through a traffic control order. Those are called modified absolute speed limits. And those are the type we're mostly going to be talking about today. These villages, to some extent, counties and state can set speed limits by cities and villages. And then for state and county roads, we're almost exclusively going to use the traffic control order process. Okay. So again, under 627, we've got the general speed limit 55 miles an hour on state and county roads. The general gravel road speed limit, which is something new since 2017, is 55 miles an hour on gravel roads. And counties with 1 million people or more have the option of going to 45 on the gravel roads at the exclusive jurisdiction of the Road Commission without our involvement. That was written by Oakland County for Oakland County, but they had to include Wayne County because you can't have a state law for one county. You have to do it for a class of counties. And so Wayne fell in just because of the population. There's some issues with there, and Oakland County Road Commission is not posting any at 45 because it's not generally the safe thing to do. Then you got your 70 mile an hour limited access general speed limit for freeways. And I know we've got a few in Metro Detroit that are posted less than 70. Through TCO. Some of those TCOs, they've given us the option since 2017 to increase the speed above 55 mile an hour on state trunk line highways and above 70 on the freeways, going up to 65 and 75. And they gave us 1 year to do at least 600 miles of freeway and 900 miles of trunk line to these new speed limits based on studies we've done. MDOT is our partner with state trunk lines. And so they chose to start with the least populated parts of the state. So if you drive up to the P, you'll find that.
Hey, Greg, I'm really sorry. We can't hear you. You keep going in and out.
Almost all the trunk line 100 miles.
Greg, I'm really sorry, but we can't hear
Okay.
It goes in and out every so often. Is there a different spot that you could go that has better internet connection? Or if you want to, you could, I could share my screen with the slides and you could just call into the meeting if you have better cell reception than you do have internet reception.
Yeah, let's try the call in for the audio.
Okay.
Where can I find the phone number?
So I will send you an email real quick here.
Okay.
Hold on for a second, everybody. We gotta love technology, don't we?
Emily, would it go better if if you advance the slides and they just tried to?
We can try that too.
We had,
Let me email.
we have good cell reception, I think.
Should have good internet connection though. I guess it were hardwired
Brent,
in.
this is Chris IT. Yeah, the less he's doing, presenting or showing his screen, the better off his audio is going to be. But it sounds really choppy. I'm not sure there's much he's going to be able to do for it. I think Emily's suggestion of him calling in is probably the best option.
Okay, can everybody see my screen now? Okay, let me get to where they were.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound. Not entered any number.
This is where we need our elevator music.
So unfortunately, I didn't quite understand when he was trying to explain, and I wanted to know about the legislative, the modified, and the defined speed limits, and he just kept on going in and out, and it just didn't
Yeah.
make sense.
Lance or Greg, can you hear us?
Yeah, we're adjusting the volume on the computer, so we're not getting that echo.
Well, and I'm just gonna kick you, or if you want to just, I'm sorry, if you want to just exit from your computer and just join from your phone, I think that's going to be your best option. And then I've got the slides showing, so you can tell me.
Okay, give us a second to get set back up so that we're looking at the slides from our end.
Okay.
Emily, would there be the opportunity to go back?
Yep.
To Commissioner Yamas's point where we can see if we can, yep, that would be perfect.
So we're just in the PowerPoint. Okay, so how far back are we going here?
Greg, I think it'd be helpful if we're back at the types of speed zones slide that talks about statutory, modified, and defined. Commissioner Yamas had some questions about that, if you want to start with that. Sorry, your audio is just going in and out, so it's hard to follow.
Okay, do you want to start with the questions and I'll try to fill in the blanks, or you want me just to pick up where I left or from the slide?
Commissioner Yamas, do you want to ask your questions and we can start there?
Sure. He, at the very beginning, he was speaking about the insurance company. We had set speeds according to what the insurance company was kind of trying to do, but they found through their own research that that wasn't good. And then I didn't hear what his answer was. And then it went into the type of speed zones and who decides and how they're established. And then it went out again.
Okay, I'll back up and kind of start with what I was saying there. Since 1974, with the national energy speed, we've been kind of told that slower is always safer. And the insurance companies, particularly AAA, back in the 70s, had a lot of propaganda at the time that was kind of reinforcing this whole slow down is always safer kind of thing. We've learned over the years that slower is not automatically safer, that pulling the pack together and having everybody driving close to the same speed as each other is the safest, regardless of whether that's a high number or a low number, depending on the type of the roadway. And so for freeways, obviously 55 is ridiculously slow in most cases. So the federal government finally got out of the process of dictating speed limits, and they allow states to do it again based on the science. So looking at the types of speed zones, again, there are three types of speed limits in Michigan: basic speed law, which supersedes everything else. It says that you have to be able to drive your car for the conditions of the road, being able to maintain control and being able to stop in the assured clear distance ahead. And so regardless of the number on the sign, if the weather like today dictates that you drive slower, then you have to slow down to the safe speed for that particular stretch of road under those conditions. A day like today, that might be, 5 or 10 miles an hour on some stretches of road. Or in the case of my drive in this morning, it was about 40 to 45 in what would normally be a 55 zone. The other types of speeds are prima facie and absolute. And prima facie speeds, again, prima facie, it's a Latin term pronounced prima facie. It means first face, and it's usually translated as on its face or at first glance. Those are the worst case scenario speed limits set up for areas like business districts where there's a presumption that the slower speed is necessary because of those conditions. And it, like any presumption, it can be rebutted if those conditions are not present at the time that the person is driving through there. So a business district, say Sunday morning, where there's no on-street parking, you've got twice as much travel lane to deal with, there's no pedestrians, there's no store windows that are open, no distractions. The driver might be able to successfully argue that 35 or 40 or even faster is safe and reasonable based on those conditions rather than the 25 that the prima facie speed limit presumes is safe and reasonable based on those conditions that would normally be present during the day. The other type is the absolute speed limit. That's the statewide 55 and 70. And those speed limits modified through a traffic controller become modified absolute speed limits. Again, we can talk about speed limits as being defined and determined as well. Determined speed limits, the ones that are labeled as statutory or fixed up there, where the legislature tells you that if a certain condition exists, here's the number that goes on the sign, and then that's defined. And determined speed limits are where the legislature says that a person or group shall figure out what is a safe and reasonable speed and post it accordingly. And that's the process that we follow with the road commissions for county roads and with MDOT for state roads. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the statewide speed limits are the 55 general speed limit, the 55 gravel road speed limit, and 70 mile an hour for freeway. We are allowed to modify that downward by statute, and since 2017, we've been able to modify them upward slightly, up to 65 on state trunk lines and up to 75 on the freeways. Next slide, please. I don't know if it's ours frozen up again or can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can. Yep, you're on. We've got the statutory speed zone slides. Do you need the next slide after this?
Got it. Yeah, it just advanced for us. Okay, so under the 2017 changes, we are now allowed to go upward from 55 and 70 based on studies that were done prior to the law changing. And the legislature gave us 1 year to do at least 600 miles of freeway up to 75 miles per hour and to 900 miles of trunk line. And MDOT, who is our partner at the state level, opted to start with the least populated parts of the state. And so the Upper Peninsula, all the trunk lines up there for the most part are going to be posted at 65 miles per hour. But when you get to the Lower Peninsula, it stops north of Cadillac. The freeways posted 75. If you go on 131, it goes almost all the way to Grand Rapids, 127 almost all the way to Lansing. But I-75, the 75 mile an hour zone stops north of Bay City because MDOT hit the magic 600 miles and won't go any further until they've had a chance to do a multi-year study. So you probably won't see any 75s down in the southern part of the state, at least until 2023 or 2024, depending on how quickly we get past the whole COVID thing, because that has changed driving behavior significantly. Next slide, please. Okay, so modified absolute speed limits under 628, they have to have a valid TCO, which means that we have to do a study. It's done in conjunction with the road commissions and the township board. for county roads. And the township board was an addition in 2006 as a compromise to get some of the other changes passed. Adding the township board hasn't really helped the process at all. It does insert a little bit of politics, and we'll talk about that later on when we get to it. So anything lower than 55 or lower than 70 on the freeway is going to have a traffic control order for it. Next slide, please. Okay, so like I said, on the trunk lines, it's MDOT and state police. We always work with the road authority. The studies are done, the signs are put up, and the TCO is filed with the county clerk's office. When everything matches, the number on the TCO becomes the valid speed limit. If the signs and the TCO don't match, it reverts back to 55 miles per hour as modified by basic speed law based on conditions. Next slide, please. And then the same thing with county roads. The biggest thing here is, again, the insertion of the township board as a signing party. And we'll talk about getting around that or working with that when we get to it. But obviously, road commissions are our partner for county roads. Again, TCO is filed with the county clerk's office. When the sign and the TCO match, then that becomes the new speed limit. If something doesn't match, it reverts back to 55 as modified by basic speed law. Next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, let's skip this one. Okay, so some of the prima facie speeds defined by the legislature. Business district, 25 miles an hour. Mobile home park, 15 miles per hour. That's one of the few sections of the vehicle code where we are specifically directed to enforce traffic on private road. The residential subdivisions and condominium complexes, and then the access point formula found in 627. Those are all prima facie speed limits. We don't do a traditional traffic control order, but there is language in the statute that a traffic control order has to be written for most of those speed limits and filed with the city or village clerk's office for those local roads. Again, at the county and state level, we're generally not working with these type of roads other than possibly the residential subdivisions. And if they meet the definition for a subdivision or a business district, the road commission can handle those speed limits without our input. The definitions for those types of zones are very specific. For instance, business district requires at least 600 feet, where 50% or more of the frontage on both sides of the road are occupied by retail businesses. So if you got an area where they get a lot of business type entities, but you've got government offices, nonprofits, churches, banks, it may not meet the definition of business district for that purpose. There are a lot of communities where they call an area their business district, but it doesn't meet the definition. And some of those are improperly, illegally posted 25 using that definition when it doesn't apply. That was kind of the same reason the legislature got rid of the definition of residence district in 2006, because it didn't apply to subdivisions, but everybody pretended it did and posted their subdivisions 25. And again, it doesn't mean that that wasn't the safe and reasonable speed for those roads. Just that the sign didn't meet the legal definition and therefore was not enforceable. So let's go ahead and next slide, please. So as I mentioned, business district is at least 600 feet, 2 city blocks, where 50% or more of the frontage on both sides are retail businesses. Now there's language in there that upper floors can be apartments as long as the main floor is retail. And again, a lot of places don't meet this definition, but they try to call that area a business district. You'll probably, if you go to a lot of the small towns in your area, you may find a few that are posted that way. Next slide, please. This residential subdivision is a newer definition. This is from 2017. Prior to 2006, it was residence district, again, which didn't really cover subdivisions. Then they had a subdivision and condominium complex as under the Land Plat Act, and that was kind of a unusual, difficult definition to interpret. And so in 2017, they went to this residential subdivision, meaning a system of interconnected highways with no through highways and a limited number of dedicated highways that serve as entrances and exits. So it kind of encompasses what you would think a subdivision should look like, but we'll find that there are some areas where, you want to think it's a traditional subdivision and it may not meet this definition. And actually the picture that's shown is an example of that. And so in 2017, they also incorporated some language about, well, what's on the next slide, I believe. Go ahead in advance. It's going to be one after this. This is the access point formula. It's available for state and county roads, but we choose not to use it because, again, it's prima facie and it's a quick and dirty method of setting speed limits. The legislature put the access point formula in here primarily for cities and villages that don't have a traffic engineer on staff. And it gives them a way to post limits that are going to be right some large percentage of the time, but will not always be perfect. So these numbers come from tens of thousands of studies that have been done over the years between us and the various road commissions and MDOT, and the density of driveways we tend to see matching certain 85th percentile speeds. And so we gave these numbers to the legislature for this quick and dirty method to set a prima facie speed limit. We often get people wanting us to post speed limits under this method on county roads. But on county roads, we will always do the study and set it scientifically because, again, the access point formula is going to be close most of the time, but it's not always going to be a perfect fit. The scientific study will always be a perfect fit. Next slide, please. Okay, and then this just shows that if you got an area that's less than the half mile, then there's a formula you use to prorate the access point formula to give you the same density. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, I already covered this stuff. Next slide, please. I guess before we get into here, I'll back up. There was a section that's new as of 2017 that I guess is not in our slides that allows 25 on areas that are similar to a subdivision, but more closely resemble the old city blocks. They were covered by the definite residence district. And this definition was put in place because the 2017 definition of the residence area didn't cover everything they hoped it would. The problem they've had in 2006 and 2017 is that if they make the definition too broad, some places want to abuse it and call the side roads that should be 40 or 45 or higher. They want to make those 25. And then if you make it go too far the other way, then you got roads that should be 25 that you can't post under the law. And so they added this language for those areas that are residential in nature, that are approved by MDOT, and that conform to the old city block style. And those can be posted 25. And then there's a language in there that requires MSP to do a study of those types of roads prior to 2023 and report to the governor in both houses so that they can determine whether it's an appropriate language or whether it's being abused by municipalities. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Greg.
So the next slide, please. We talked about, and I think we were broken at that point, the modified speed limit for gravel roads is only for Oakland and Wayne counties because of population. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the process right now. And as mentioned before, it's in coordination with MDOT or the road commission. And then when it comes to county roads, the township is also a signatory. We need to do the study to determine the 85th percentile. That's the way the law is written. And then the speed will be set by rounding the 85th percentile to the nearest 5 mile per hour increment. And that's up or down. So if it's 44, it becomes 45. If it's 42, it becomes 40. The study takes into account the congestion of the road, how narrow the road is. If you picture a wide open M road with wide shoulders, you're going to feel more comfortable driving faster than you would in a residential area where there's a lot for drivers to take into account. So if there's lots of driveways, if there's mailboxes, if there's schools, if there is a lot going on, drivers will not feel comfortable traveling faster because there's a lot to analyze. And if you compare that to a freeway where there's no entrances and exits other than the designated exits that are on-ramps and off-ramps, because there's a lot less to take into consideration, drivers feel comfortable traveling much faster. And this is why those driveway counts follow the 85th percentile in general and are based on it, because when there's more driveways to take into account, drivers will travel slower. Next slide, please. If you could keep advancing until all the text appears, I'd appreciate it. So the speed study is done in conjunction with, in this case, the road commission or MDOT. There's several reasons for that. We want to use an unmarked vehicle. We want participation by multiple parties so that there's buy-in to the result. We use a LiDAR device or a laser device to measure vehicle speeds. And the reason we use that is we can pinpoint specific vehicles. So for instance, if there's a line of 6 cars traveling behind a very slow moving vehicle, maybe a mail truck or a horse and buggy or something like that, we're not going to count that group of vehicles. We would only count free-flowing traffic. So if there's a group of 5 cars, we count the first one and disregard the 4 behind it. This can't be done with a traffic counter or something in the roadway because the traffic can't be analyzed. So we typically aim for 100 cars in very sparsely traveled roadways that may be difficult, and we might use a traffic counter. But in general, we want to do an in-person study. I'll note we use an unmarked vehicle, so it's not influenced by a patrol car or where drivers are going to modify their speeds in response to what's visible. Next slide, please. So once we have the 85th percentile speed based on that study, we submit the paperwork to set the speed limit. I'll note that the road and the setup of the road depends whether we do one study or multiple studies. So in some areas where there's different scenarios, different businesses in one area or residences in the other, we'll do multiple studies. So that is entirely location dependent. It depends on what's in that area. And we decide in each individual basis how many specific studies we're going to do. So the ideal speed is the maximum limit. So that's best case scenario. That's dry roads. That's usually mid-morning and mid-afternoon, where traffic is not unusually heavy due to rush hour, morning and evening, or lunch hour. So the speed limit is set for best case scenario, again, because that's the speed limit. That's the maximum speed, and that's what can be enforced. During other times, the best speed might be a slower one, which is covered under the basic speed law. Drivers are required to maintain control of their vehicle and, in essence, not crash. Next slide, please. So at the end of the last slide, it mentions that we want to make a road a speed limit enforceable. So if the speed limit is too low, if 90% of the drivers are traveling over the speed limit, that's not an enforceable speed limit because we're not targeting the unsafe drivers. So that's our goal. We want to give law enforcement the chance to target the unsafe drivers, the ones that are traveling dangerously or unsafe. So 628 and 627 dictate how the speed study is to be conducted. Next slide, please. This is the out of place slide. The last one is the out of place slide addressing that by 2023, we submit a study to the governor in the two houses. So the 85th percentile speed is the safest speed. Lieutenant Cook mentioned earlier that we want to group drivers together. If a speed limit is set too low, some drivers will be traveling at that speed because they don't want to get a ticket, while other drivers are driving at the speed they feel comfortable. And when that speed difference is too high, we have more of a chance of accidents, and we've seen that in statistics. So this is the chances of being in an accident on a curve related to the 85th percentile speed. So you can see at the bottom of the curve, the chances of being in an accident are lowest at the 85th percentile speed. And that's what we're trying to set the roadway at. We're trying to group all of the drivers together as closely as possible. And we'll look at some examples. Next slide, please. So crash involvement versus speed. On the bottom is deviation from average speed. And on the left is crash involvement per 100 million miles. And you can see that for highways, that's the bottom curve, right about plus 8 to 10 miles an hour is where there's the least amount of crashes. So if you think of a highway set at 70 miles an hour and think about the speed, the average speed or 85th percentile speed of that highway, it's right about 8 miles an hour above 70, so 78 to 80. That is where the least amount of crashes occur because everybody is traveling about the same speed, very closely to that. And then for daytime rural, you can see that it slides slightly towards maybe 5 miles an hour over. So if you think of a rural road set at 55, the least amount of crashes occur right about 58 to 60. If you think about the speed that vehicles normally travel on a rural road, that would make sense. Next slide, please. So some studies have been done. This cites several studies in 1997. Multiple studies have been done since then that produced very similar results. Next slide, please. So the objective of the studies was to determine if raising or lowering the speed limits affected driver behavior. So does the number on the sign affect how fast people travel? So 22 states were used at 100 sites. They lowered speed limits as much as 20 miles an hour and raised them as much as 15. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the findings of the study was that posting a lower speed limit does not decrease motorist speeds, and posting a higher speed limit doesn't create a corresponding increase in vehicle speeds. The average change was less than 1.5 miles an hour. And we're going to look at a freeway example and a rural road example to show how this occurred. Next slide, please. Artificially low speed limits, as I mentioned before, produce very high non-compliance rates. So if the speed limit is artificially low, 70 or 80 or 90% of the drivers will be traveling in excess of the speed limit, which is not an enforceable standard. We want law enforcement to focus on the unsafe drivers. Next slide. We've noted already that artificially lowering speed limits causes more crashes because of speed difference. So if you have some vehicles traveling 25 and others traveling 45, that's a large speed difference. It creates road rage incidents and creates more crashes, and the studies have backed that up. Next slide. So most motorists did not increase or decrease their speed when the speed limit was raised or lowered. Drivers drive what they at a speed they perceive as reasonable and safe, and they don't alter their speed based on the speed limit sign. Next slide. Next slide. The results of this study have caused most states to use the 85th percentile as the criterion for establishing speed limits because it works. When studies have been done before and after, crashes, the number of crashes and the severity of crashes goes down. Usually, when a speed limit is drastically different from the 85th percentile, it's because of political pressure or public pressure. As we mentioned before, politics can often play into this. If in the cases where studies have been done, crashes have gone down. So you might ask, why wouldn't we take into account the layout of the road, the curves of the road, the number of driveways when we're setting the 85th percentile speed? And the reason we don't is because the 85th percentile speed already takes that into account. So we are documenting how fast drivers are traveling on a roadway. And all of those driveways are taking in the layout of the road and the number of driveways, the closeness of the curbs, how wide the road is. They're already taking all that into account when deciding how fast to travel. Next slide. Next slide. So here's, yep, keep going, please. So here's some examples. Next slide. The first one, you might ask, placing a patrol car on the roadway, does it make a difference? I mentioned already that when we do a study, we do it with an unmarked car. But you might ask, does if we have an artificially low speed limit, does placing a patrol car increase compliance? And most of the time it does not. Next slide. Here's an example, Saginaw Highway, where a study was done with a unmarked and a marked, and you can see the 85th percentile changes by 1 mile an hour when there's a patrol car parked on the road. Drivers generally don't reduce their speed when a patrol car is present. Next slide. So here's where we're going to address several examples, 2 freeway examples, trunk line, and a county road. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the first example is 496 in Lansing. This is the speed of vehicles when the speed limit was set at 55 miles per hour. We talked about compliance. If you look at the top of the graph, 55 miles an hour, the amount of vehicles traveling less than 55 is only 2.4%. So 97.6% of vehicles are traveling faster than the posted speed limit. That's a perfect example of a speed limit that's set too low. Vehicles, 97% of vehicles are traveling faster than the speed limit. That's not an enforceable speed limit. Law enforcement would be tied up with people that are traveling safely instead of targeting vehicles that are driving unsafe. Next slide. So this is at 70 miles an hour. If you go to the next slide, you'll see them side by side. So on the left is 55 miles an hour, and on the right is 70 miles an hour. You can see that the 85th percentile speed actually went down when the speed limit was 70 miles an hour. The reason for that is drivers are grouped more closely together. And you can see the benefit of this right on the graph. Instead of 97% of drivers not being in compliance, now you have a majority of drivers that are in compliance. And now law enforcement can focus on if you look down at the bottom of the graph, on those drivers that are driving unsafe. Law enforcement can focus on the drivers that are the problem instead of being tied up with drivers that are actually traveling safely. We'll look at another example. If you go to the next slide, please. This is I-69 in Flint. The same setup on the left is 55 miles an hour, and on the right is 70 miles an hour. So a before and after. See the same thing happening. The 85th percentile is 74 at 55, and the 85th is 73 at 70. Again, the reason for this is drivers are grouped more closely together and traveling more safely as a result. So if you look at the distribution on the left, you've got a group of drivers at just below 50 and a group of drivers at just below 80. That's a 30-mile-an-hour difference, which creates very unsafe speeds. Whereas on the right, at 70 miles an hour, drivers are grouped much more closely together, creating a safer driving environment. And again, on the left, the distribution is not normal. You've got two humps or two groups of people that are separated by about 10 miles an hour, which creates unsafe conditions. Imagine traveling in the right lane and the left lane is traveling 10, 15 miles an hour faster than you. When you go to make a lane change, it's very difficult to actually make that lane change because of the speed difference. And then on the right, law enforcement again can focus on those drivers that are traveling at an unsafe speed. Next slide. So this is a trunk line. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Just going to look at them side by side. So at 25 miles an hour, you've got two drivers in compliance. Whereas when the speed limit is set properly at 35 miles an hour, you have a large majority of the drivers in compliance with the speed limit. So again, law enforcement can focus on the ones that are traveling unsafe. Next slide. If you could advance all the way to where the two graphs are together. Oh, if you could go back. Yeah, this has just got the one graph.
Is already set safely.
Yeah, so this is a county road that's set properly at 45 miles an hour. You can see the 85th percentile is 43. And again, law enforcement can focus on that driver traveling 55, 50, 51, and which is only a few drivers out of all of the vehicles that pass him. So a very consistent bell graph, a very consistent distribution, and drivers are traveling at speeds very similar to each other. Next slide. So we talked about public perception, the perception that a higher speed limit will make the roadway unsafe. The truth is that a properly set speed limit will make the road more safe because we're grouping drivers closer together. Next slide. When the speed limits change, as we've seen from several examples, the travel speeds of the drivers do not change. What changes is the compliance. So you've brought the people that are traveling safely in compliance with the speed limit. The number on the sign doesn't dictate the travel speed of the road. It does dictate which drivers can be targeted for enforcement. Next slide. So our goals for a speed limit is to minimize the variance. We want to decrease road rage incidences, tailgating, making lane changes more safe. We want to reduce aggressive driving behaviors, and we do that by getting drivers in a tighter group in terms of their speed. Again, we represent the maximum speed under ideal conditions. So it wouldn't make sense to change the speed limit sign every morning where the roads are icy. That wouldn't be feasible. So the sign is set for ideal conditions and drivers are required to maintain control of the vehicle. Next slide. Let's talk about school zones a little bit. School zones are very specifically defined in the Michigan Vehicle Code. The picture on this slide is an example of way too much information. So a driver approaching this sign cannot process all of those time zones to determine if they're in one of those times where it's 25 miles an hour. So signs need to be concise and they need to be clear for users. Most drivers are going to completely disregard that sign because they can't process all the information on it. So next slide. So schools defined as an educational institute, and that could be private school, public school, charter school. The law states that school zones are 1,000 feet from the property line in any direction. Next slide. So the purpose is to protect kids walking to school. If a school does not have any students that walk to school, then a school zone cannot be used to set the speed limit. However, if one student walks to school every day, then we can use a school zone. Next slide. So again, because we're trying to protect walking students, these do not apply to areas where there's an overhead walkway. Next slide. So the time parameters are very specific. It's 30 minutes before school begins and 30 minutes after school is released. If there's an off-campus lunch period, 30 minutes can be applied to that lunchtime. And the times must be rounded to the nearest 5-minute interval. And it's restricted to 30 minutes. So it has to be 30 minutes. Next slide. So school superintendent's only role in this is to decide when that time zone starts. So it can be slid. It has to remain 30 minutes. If school starts at 7:45, the superintendent can choose to make it 7:20 to 7:50. So the superintendent cannot make it more than 30 minutes before school starts, but he can slide it to incorporate a little bit of time after school starts. But again, it has to be 30 minutes and no more than 30 minutes before classes start. Next slide. So that process, again, is defined very clearly by the Michigan Vehicle Code. And specifically the 1,000 feet, the fact that students, at least one student has to walk to school, and the 30-minute time window. Next slide. The law also states that it cannot be decreased by more than 20 miles an hour. So if it's 55, 35, 45, 25, and it cannot be less than 25 miles an hour. So if the speed limit's already 30, it can only go to 25. Next slide. Just some examples. Next slide. So if the school is located in an area that requires children to cross a trunk line, then the superintendent can submit a request for a school crossing, and that's defined more specifically in under 613A. Next slide. That's all we have. I don't know how much time we have for questions, but we're happy to take some if there are some.
All right, thank you, Lance and Greg. We do have just a couple of minutes if we for questions, if anyone has any.
Commissioner McCollum.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about the 5-lane trunk road graph. I just need a little bit of clarification on how the percentile was 85% percentile was 43. The speed limit was 43. It looks like it's 38 to me, but
38 would be about the 50th percentile. Because on a nice bell curve like that, your mean, median, and mode should all be about the same. And in this case, the 50th percentile is about 38 miles an hour. The 85th, which is roughly 1 standard deviation above the mean, it was where we set the speed limit, in this case, 43 miles an hour, and so it would be rounded to 45. This one was already in place before we were requested to do the study, and it shows too that it busts the myth of people always adjust to 8 or 9 over. This one was already set at a reasonable speed limit, and you had a nice normal distribution.
I guess I have a question. I thought the slashes on the chart that Commissioner McCollum is talking about, it looks like 38 degrees far exceeds where you have the 85th percentile, like at 43. So do those slashes not represent vehicles? Because at 43, where you have the 85th percentile, there are not enough slashes. So I had the same confusion as
okay. Yeah. Each of those ticks represents one vehicle in the study. And so you'll see that most of the vehicles, the largest number of an individual speed were at 38.
Yes.
And so that represents your mode. And it's also on a normal distribution, your mean and your median will overlap the mode. Now, in this case, if you start at the lowest speed and work your way up, if you had 100 cars and you started counting those cars at 30 miles an hour, wherever you hit the 85th car, that's going to be 85th percentile. Obviously, when we got a speed study that's more or less than 100 cars, then we have to do the math. But in this case, the 85th percentile worked out to 43 miles per hour. And again, the speed limit was already set at 45. This is a perfect example of one that was set appropriately ahead of time. And you can see, again, if you turn that those tick marks on their side, it makes a nice bell curve with the speed limit set a little bit over 1 standard deviation above the mean. And those statistically are the safest drivers at around the 85th percentile. The drivers at the 50th percentile, if you think about driver behavior, people going middle of the pack are basically just driving. People going a little faster than the middle of the pack probably are driving with a purpose, probably paying more attention to what's going around them, probably have a little bit sharper skill set. People driving below the middle of the pack might be older drivers, inexperienced drivers, drivers with physical disabilities, intoxicated drivers, etc. So as you get down to those drivers that are on the low end, those are actually less safe than the drivers that are, traveling a little bit above the 85th percentile. If we were to go back to the what they call the U curve or bathtub curve, you show that the safest drivers tend to be going about the 85th percentile, and that they get more dangerous as you go either side of that, but they get more dangerous faster as you go slower than the safest drivers. Again, probably because of the decreasing skill set of those drivers driving at the bottom of the pack. Of course, as they get faster, kinetic energy takes over, and interaction with other drivers takes over, and those drivers start to get more dangerous.
Thanks for the clarification.
Are there further questions?
I would like to thank
hearing none, I want to thank. Go ahead. Doug?
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to thank the officers for taking the time to make this presentation.
Always happy to help, and willing to come down and do this sometime in person when conditions allow. I lived in Ipsy for a couple of years, and always happy to come back down to the area.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your time and expertise.
Thank you.
I'll hand it back to Cheryl.
All right. Well, again, thank you very much to Michigan State Police for coming down and doing that presentation. Next up on our agenda is a very short break. So if we could be back at 10:15, we do have several people with McChrysip or associated with McChrysip here, and we'd like to move into our next presentation. So if we could be back at 10:15, that would be a good thing.
Right, go ahead.
Okay, next up on our agenda, we have Gail Cummings, Adam Tuntis, and Bob DeVries, either on behalf of or with the Michigan County Road Commission Self-Insurance Pool. I know that often insurance and liability are things that we don't particularly want to think about until we need them. So we've certainly brought Gail on board to tell us what it is we should be thinking about at this point in time, at least to become familiar with the coverage. I know that we have been incredibly grateful to be a part of the pool. It has certainly served us well over the years. We're also proud of the fact that Commissioner Doug Fuller does also sit on the board of McChrysip. And so we've learned quite a bit about McChrysip over the years. I know that sometimes making those phone calls to Gail is a mixed blessing. We always enjoy hearing from her, but on the other hand, usually the topic isn't one that we want to be having at that time. But like I said, it's an incredibly important thing for us to be a part of that pool. So I thought it'd be helpful if Gail was able to share, just give us an overview of exactly what all it is that McChrysip does for us. So with that, I'd be happy to turn it over to Gail.
Well, thank you. Bob and Adam, did you guys bring cameras with you, or are you going to be, there's Bob. Morning. I was going to introduce my cohorts here. Here they are. So I'm Gail. I am the administrator of your pool, and I brought with me Adam Tuntis, who is one of our liability defense attorneys, one of our primary, maybe D, and also my general counsel for the pool matters, and Bob DeVries, who is our lobbyist with GCSI. Bob's new to the pool last year, a little bit the year before then, but he has taught us a lot, and what we'd like to do is now share some of not only an overview of the pool and what the insurance is, but somehow help you understand what it is we see is important for you to maintain your, well, so I don't have to call Cheryl quite as often. We're going for knowledge. So in 1983, the state legislature passed a special provision that allows governmental entities to pool, to join together and create a trust that is able to manage their risk for them. In 1984, on April 1st of 1984, the pool started operations, and I think we started with about, I think it was 26 or 28 road commissions, and we were able to, during that time, get our program started. And since 1984, we now carry a lot more types of coverage, and we have every eligible member. Technically, Oakland County is eligible, but they're really too big to be a part of this pool. And so we don't have them in the pool, but we try to coordinate with them as much as possible. And I'll explain more of that later. But you have a couple of binders from us. This is your coverage documents. You have these in your main office. And it talks about, and so you can see, it's not real complicated. It's pretty thin. We cover all of your liability exposures: auto liability, general liability, which really is road defect and flooding. We cover employment practices liability, which has a bigger book. I'll show you in a minute. And public officials, errors and omissions. That's for the board. And so we have all of those coverage agreements in here. These coverages were invented by road commissioners, and they are tailored to road commissioners. So they cover all of the things that you really should be worried about, and none of the things that you don't have to worry about because they're either uninsurable or you're not subject to those because you're a governmental entity. Governmental entities are immune from everything, well, sort of, right, Adam? Kind of, sort of. Immune from everything unless they're not. So we do have several exceptions to governmental immunity. Our attorneys have studied those. Your predecessors put into place these agreements so that you can be supported as you go through your work. The pool is fortunate. We are one of probably, it looks to me like one of the most successful pools out there. And I kind of think part of it is because we have this little slash. I mean, road commissions have very well-defined sets of responsibility, which is Adam's part of this presentation. And so we have this narrow area that you have to focus on. And I mean, as opposed to the whole county, you just have the roads and the road liabilities and all of those issues. So as we have defined our coverages, we've been able to focus on defending you within those parameters. So we developed a bigger book. This is the Employment Practices Liability Guidelines Notebook. You have all received this book. Somehow or other, we have sent one somewhere to everyone. If you do not have one, we will send you another. What this book is it's 25 tabs, and all of the tabs are written by an attorney, and they talk to you about your responsibility as employers and as a governmental board. So it's got Open Meetings Act information in here on ethics and code of conduct business. I don't think we have the code of conduct. That's off but we have fraud, drug and alcohol testing for CDL drivers. So it's basically how to be an employer. It's a codification of all of the state and federal laws that guide you as employers. So here's a line in the sand on discrimination. Here's what is harassment. Here's what you need to worry about. And then we also have programs where we will come in and help you individually, as a group rather, but individually deal with any of those issues. I currently have one road commission that has a harassment complaint filed by the HR director against the managing director. It's gender, race, and something else in there. And I have 2 attorneys in investigating that. We're doing an independent investigation. We are going to get a report. I get the report. The pool has commissioned this. So I get the report, which means this argument between 2 of your top staff people is not going to the newspapers because it's attorney-client and I'm not going to release it. So we protect the road commission. We have programs in place where when you do hit a speed bump, when you do hit a pothole, that you can have support. We have some training. Bob and Adam are part of a new training program that we put together because we have a lot of new commissioners, and helping them understand what makes sense for them personally, as well as together as the board, as supporting the road commission, what their responsibilities are. We want to come in there and help share some of the lessons we've learned by working across the entire state. I currently serve 75 road commissions in the state of Michigan. We do about 400 denials on potholes and windshield claims every year. We don't pay pothole claims unless the road commission did something wrong in their operations. And we all make mistakes, which is why we have insurance. So we are in no judgment zone, but we do write checks. We also provide support to your people if they have to be deposed in a lawsuit. We have 3 people that run around the state full-time and do training. Crash investigation, how do you protect your road commission? Getting your frontline crews ready. We've had so many missed dig issues going on lately. You call, you get everything marked, and then you get out there and you have a problem. They're real fast coming after you guys for the money. Most of the time, you might not have to pay that money. And we've got people who know the rules. So we've now developed a training for your frontline people. So when your crew goes out there, they know how to substantiate their work so that they can prove who was right and who was wrong. And we can maybe not have to bring you out of that. We stand behind the road commission and your right to do business, which means you can revoke a permit if you need to. I have a lawsuit that's been going on in Lapeer County for, I don't know, Doug, how long have we been talking KWA up in Lapeer? 5 years?
Certainly all of that.
I know. We had to pull a permit. This big water project didn't come out. This big water, they didn't put in the right subsoil. So the road commission had to pull the permit to say, hey, you need to do this the way we agreed. So the big player came back and sued the road commission. Now, if the road commission was doing that on their own, you probably would have had to give up 3 years ago. You don't have the staff time and the money and the expertise to keep throwing this ball back and forth. But we're able to stand up for all of the road commissions and your right to demand compliance with your permit. And so by pulling this type of pool together, you guys have been able to determine where we focus your work, how we take care of the road commission's right to do their business. We also have a property damage program. We cover 1,500 buildings in the state of Michigan. Total value of buildings and equipment is about $2 billion, 1.8, I think, $billion. That's about 5,800 licensed vehicles, about half of which are probably snowplows. Someday I'm going to get a real count on how many snowplows we cover. Those aren't distinguished in our schedule, and they should be, because back when the pool was started, you couldn't get insurance anywhere on a snowplow. Nobody wanted to insure a snowplow, and I can tell you why. We have problems right now. We're getting a lot of backing accidents. We have a protocol where in a storm, you go through the intersection and then you back up because you don't want a windrow freezing and impairing traffic down the road. But we either need to do a better job of training the public that we are going to do that, or we need a better job of somehow determining how to do that safely. Because I think we've had probably 9 backing accidents in the last 7 or 8 days. So we need to figure that out, but we can now see that here in our office, that we have statistics here, and we're focused just on road commissions. We also have a custom program. If you wreck a 10-year-old snowplow that you paid, what, $75,000, $80,000 for, and you total it, you can get a brand new $280,000 snowplow to replace that one. So there is literally no other program I've ever heard of in the country that you can get. You have to insure it the right way, and we go around and help you try to figure all of that out. But we do try to make sure that this is what's right. So because we're not an insurance company, but we are an insurer. We have oversight from the Department of Insurance. They come in every 3 years to make sure we're doing a good job. But in order to do insurance, you have to have a retained pot of money to guarantee all of your promises. And that's called our reserves. And so we invest those reserves. It's between probably $65 and $70 million every year. This year it's more. We've had a good year so far in the investment market. But we have to take that money and keep it aside to guarantee all of our promises under our contracts with the road commissions. So that money is invested, and we've got a very high-performing institutional investment program that we've developed over the years. We have 13 active managers that take care of the money. This year, like I said, stay tuned. If March 31 holds up, Doug is going to be announcing a record earnings year. Our earnings and our excess surplus money in the bank every year comes back to the members. It doesn't go to State Farm to build a new building or Prudential to build a new building. It goes back to the members, and it goes back to the roads. Through this last year, we've given $200 million back to road commissions, 198. So we're working really hard. This is your program. My mandate from my board of directors is to get you back on the road when you've had a bad day, to support the people that work for the road commission if they had a bad day and they need to maybe tell us that they made a big mistake. I'll get them a lawyer to talk directly to, and we will counsel that person in how to describe the accident when they talk to other people to limit the liability of the road commission. We used to have about 300 open lawsuits at any one time in the pool back in 90s. As of yesterday, we have 27. So this is what being able to focus on your piece of the pie and being able to customize the training and being able to get the staff that know how to manage a certain range of claims. And I kind of think the people who designed this pool were geniuses. And I believe that you've got a long, if we can keep road commissions going, I think that this is a really good tool to help you be successful. Doug, did I miss anything on pool stuff?
No, I think it was a good representation. Thank you.
Well, and Doug has, by the way, he's been an absolute, I've been here 20 years. For those of you, well, 19, I'm rounding up. But for those of you who weren't aware of that, I've gone through a few board members in my day. Doug is an excellent board member. And my board right now, I think, just works together so well. I have 9 people with totally different points of view that argue things out and help me very much come to good decisions. And I appreciate you sharing him with us. The rest of the program is Adam and Bob. Adam is going to talk about the legal side, being our legal beagle, and then Bob's going to talk a little bit about political because you guys are. So Adam?
Thank you, Gail. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me and having me here. Well, first of all, I'm Adam Tuntis. I serve as Chief Litigation Counsel for the MCRISA, General Counsel in several capacities. I'm a civil litigator. I work out of Grand Rapids. I've been doing this for 16 years, and I represent the pool's members all over the state. So whether you're in Chippewa County, Antrim County, or Cass County, or Washtenaw County, if you're in trouble and you call the pool, odds are you're going to see me or one of my colleagues. And it is a point of professional honor to represent, by the way, the pool's members. You know, nobody does more with less, in my humble opinion, than county road commissions and their staff. There's never enough funding. There's never enough appreciation. And so being here to swing away for you on your side is something that brings me great professional satisfaction. Now, I have a presentation that sort of shies away from the specifics. I hate to talk about legal issues specifically in an open meeting. It's been beaten out of me, the willingness to do that. But I do want to address two salient points that I think would be helpful or should be helpful as you formulate policy. And the first is a clear understanding of the road commission's purpose. And the second is a description of your various legal protections. The purpose of the road commission, as you know, is to maintain those rights of way under your jurisdiction in a manner that's safe for the motoring public. But there are provisions of the county road law that suggest how you go about doing that. MCL 2249, that's one of the only legal sites I'm going to give or drop during this presentation, talks about a county road commission, and it says you're a corporate body, right? And there's a provision that I love to refer to when I give presentations like this. The second prong of that statute says, the Board of County Road Commissioners shall act as an administrative board only, and the function of the board shall be limited to the formulation of policy and the performance of official duties imposed by law. The formulation of policy. And then there's two other provisions in that statute that say you shall hire a superintendent and you shall employ a highway engineer. So in the vision of our legislature and the framers of the county road law, you are a policy-making board. So you're really at 30,000 feet. You've got great judgment. In many instances, my understanding is Washtenaw is appointed, but in many instances, you're elected directly by your community at large. And so really your job number one is to set good policy and support the folks around you who you're obligated to hire under the county road law, like your manager, your engineers, and their staff, so that they can do their job as best as possible. I always think of, I'm a sports fan, and I think of the NFL owner, the National Football League owner, who likes to meddle in what happens on the field. And in my experience, it never worked, maybe with the exception of Jerry Jones. It never works well because you hire a coaching staff, you hire folks that know what you're doing, and if you've done your job well, and you've hired good people, then you just need to stay out of their way and let them manage the product on the field or in the trench or in between the lines of the right of way, as it were. And I can tell you from experience working with Cheryl and Jim that you have an incredible staff of folks here at the Road Commission. They do a great job. They're very smart. They're very responsive, and they're very helpful. And frankly, I know this is being recorded, but I can't say that about every one of the pool's members. Believe it or not, there are road commissions out there that could do a better job in that respect, but not Washtenaw. So kudos to you for that. So again, the first thing I would leave you with is that you're really at 30,000 feet, and it's your obligation to formulate good policy. And the pool's got a bunch of resources to help you do that. You know, it employs a roster of attorneys and professionals. You have the guidelines. I've helped draft encroachment policies and mailbox policies for the pool's members. We've got folks who help you with your permitting process, who make sure that your written policies can be locked down and are sensible and defendable if we ever have to end up in the well of a courtroom and argue about them. And I can tell you that the Michigan Supreme Court and all the intermediate courts underneath it and the trial courts around the state, including Washtenaw, give you wide latitude and will defer to your judgment, as they should. Judges are loath to sit as road commissioners, even if there's a case or controversy in front of them. And so this policy-making function, this hiring function you have in relation to your engineer and your manager and all the other superintendents is really important, because courts will defer to you when the chips are down. Courts will look to you and give your judgment great deference. Now, I want to stop at this point because normally we do this in person, and so it's a little bit more interactive. Are there any questions about anything I've said, comments, concerns?
Commissioner McCollum?
Thank you. Yes, I agree with you. Is it Adam?
It is. It is.
Okay. That I started in May of last year, and I knew a little bit about the Road Commission because I worked with them from my community. But when I got on the board, I had no idea how much work they did and how much expertise they had. And I'm very proud of our Road Commission. I do think we have one of the best, if not the best. So thank you for recognizing that.
Absolutely.
Other questions or comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Green.
Hi, just a couple of questions. When I was a township trustee, there were situations where I might be liable individually. Can you think of any situations where a commissioner might be liable individually?
That is a great question.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner. Thank you for it. The short answer is, boy, it's hard for me to envision a circumstance where you would be, without going into crazy hypotheticals and crawling into the weeds. Let me say this about your immunities, which was the second part of my presentation anyway. So thank you for dovetailing for me. You as commissioners, you are the highest elected, in this case, appointed policymakers of this arm of government, and you enjoy, with rare exception, absolute immunity as long as you've been acting within the context of your role as this policymaking board. Meaning that if you make a decision, nobody can hail you into court over that decision as long as you made it within the scope and context of your role as a county road commissioner. Now, the county road law also says none of you folks can be employed by the County Road Commission. And if you were an employee of the County Road Commission, an analysis of your liability would be a little different. Employees under Michigan law of a governmental entity may be liable for personal injury or property damage if in fact they were acting in the scope of their employment but were grossly negligent. But I don't think that's a germane concept for any of you fine folks. I think your road commissioners, you're the highest appointed members of this level of government. And I think as long as you're acting in the scope of that duty and series of obligations, you're probably fine.
Adam, can I just slide in? We've had one road commission that got almost in a little bit of trouble, and it is when individual road commissioners forgot that they are only a road commission when they work with the body corporate. So once you're out on your own, you're working outside of what Adam, I forgot exactly the words, but outside of your assigned your box, you can get into trouble. You can also get individual fines, but nothing, I think, of the scope that Adam was talking about. What you need to do is remember, the 5 of you all together are a board, but each of you individually is not the road commission. And as long as you keep your actions together, you should be fine. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah, it is. And I want to clarify, Commissioner Green, I was speaking about tort liability for personal injury or property damage. Of course, there are employment laws that govern the way you operate as a board. There's the Open Meetings Act. The FOIA has certain penalty provisions. I mean, there's a whole host of obligations and responsibilities you have under law, but liability and exposure for personal injury or property damage because of the road commission's operations is not something that I think any of you really need to worry about, as long as you're staying in your lane and acting as a board, so to speak. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the clarification.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, well, are there any other questions? I don't mean to short circuit.
I have no questions. Commissioner Yamas, did you have any? No. Okay.
Great. Well, the other part of this sort of protection and immunity conversation is a broad overview of the Governmental Tort Liability Act, the GTLA, we call it in lawyer land. It's a statutory regime that acts as an umbrella and protects the state and all the various subdivisions of government underneath it from liability in situations where you've got personal injury or property damage. And so Gail used the turn of phrase she's heard me use before. You're absolutely immune unless you're not. And you're not if somebody can bring a claim underneath one of 6 very narrowly tailored statutory exceptions. For a road commission, I mean, I basically deal with 2. There's the motor vehicle exception, which is when one of your pieces of equipment is involved in a crash on a roadway, anywhere in the state, or anywhere, I guess, for that matter. And the other exception is what we refer to colloquially as the highway exception. And that's anytime there's an injury or property damage that relates to an alleged roadway defect. The good news is the motor vehicle exception operates just like any other, what we call third-party tort claim under our state's no-fault law. So, if one of your pieces of equipment is involved in a crash, you're liable if the person who's been injured can sustain or sustains an injury above the serious impairment threshold. You're liable for a certain umbrella of damages, just like any other third-party no-fault carrier, State Farm, Allstate, Citizens, etc. The roadway defect claims are a little bit different. Those are frankly unique to you and to MDOT. I mean, you're one of the only entities in our state that is liable for that, or could potentially be liable for that type of exposure. And so a good understanding of the highway exception, I think, can help you formulate reasonable policy. Now, under Michigan law, the road commission is liable for personal injury or property damage that occurs because of a persistent defect, which is a physical imperfection with the roadbed surface in between the fog lines under all weather conditions. So puddles don't count, snow doesn't count, so on and so forth. You're basically talking about potholes or other types of imperfections. And you're not liable in every circumstance. You're liable if you had notice of that alleged defect. And if a claimant wants to bring a suit against the road commission, they have a statutory notice provision that they have to honor and comply with. So there are a bunch of different procedural hoops and hurdles that the state legislature has put in place to insulate a road commission from liability, even under those circumstances. And, I like to tell folks that the reasons for those protections are because it's taxpayer money at stake, because you have a very difficult job, because you never have enough resources to make sure every stretch of roadway is a PACER rating 10, right, under your jurisdiction. You're good if you can get a bunch of them at 4s and 5s. And unless you had notice of a particularly egregious defect, odds are you're not going to be responsible. And the law describes what that notice is. So when you're setting policy and when you're deciding what you want your encroachment policy to be, how you want to handle items in the right of way, so on and so forth, how you want to plow, it helps to keep in mind that you're really only responsible for what happens in between the fog lines. And even then, not always. Does that make any sense? Any questions, comments about that?
So you talked about the, so may I respond?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You talked about the persistent defect, and you mentioned one of them might be a pothole, and there might be some notice requirements. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Absolutely, Commissioner. Under state law, under the GTLA, if somebody, well, there's 2 separate notice requirements, right? The first is that you're only responsible for injury or property damage caused by a defect. If it's a defect, number 1. And number 2, if you had notice of it. That is to say, the folks you employ knew that there was a huge swimming pool sized pothole on one of your rights of way and didn't do anything about it. The law says that notice of a defect will be presumed if it's been there for longer than 30 days. And so one of the issues we litigate on occasion is, and believe it or not, we will have pavement experts come and inspect alleged defects, and they'll look at it and they'll look at weather records and they'll try to glean and discern whether based on what they're seeing, this pothole's been here for 15 days or 35 days or 40 days. And there is actually some science, art, but also some science that goes into that determination. And so if you've known about it, you got to do something about it. And the law assumes you've known if it's been there for longer than 30 days. Now, I will say most of the pool's members, particularly Washtenaw, have superintendents and folks that are driving roads on a daily basis. And so I've never encountered something where you had a defect and it had been known about, certainly for more than 30 days and nothing done. You know, I can tell you from experience that the folks at your particular road commission are very responsive to citizen complaints. And if a call comes in, somebody's out there in a matter of hours, certainly days, doing something about it. And that's a good thing, as they should be doing. The second commissioner notice provision that's relevant to a liability analysis is the notice that's got to be sent by a claimant to preserve, is the word I'll use, to preserve a claim under the highway exception. And state law says that they've got 60 days from the day they were injured or their property was damaged to notify you and to notify the county clerk that they've been injured. And the statute sets forth a few separate items that need to be in that notice. And if they blow that date or their notice doesn't contain that required information, their claim is not preserved. And so even if you had a defect, they can't do anything about it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
Other questions? I don't see any.
Wonderful. The last thing I wanted to raise is the importance of calling the pool early and often, which you do anyway. Cheryl does, Jim does. I mean, regular contact as needs to be appropriate with the pool and therefore with folks like me. But it is really important that you not try and solve liability problems on your own. You call the pool or Gail any time of day, and she will get a hold of me within 5 minutes, whether it's dinner time and I'm sitting down with my family, whether it's Sunday afternoon and I'm walking home from church, wherever it is, she'll get a hold of me and we will put together a network of professionals that will help you handle that situation. All of it being done under the direction of an attorney at the behest of your insurance company, and it's all protected, and so it needn't be shared with anybody. So there is a wealth of information and a wealth of resources out there that you should and your staff should avail itself of. And I would just encourage you to do it early and often. The pool cares very deeply about its members. Its vendors, myself included, care very deeply about you, about your mission, love to stand by you and represent you. And we're here to help if anything happens. That's all I've got, unless there are any other questions.
Thank you, Adam. That was really good. I love this training. It's fun. I think what you can tell, and I'll introduce Bob in 2 seconds, but the way we run this pool is we find the smartest people we know, and then we support them as they do their work. And most of the time, they absolutely fall in love. I'll say fall in love. I don't know if that's exactly what it is, but they become very loyal to our road commissions, the people, the mechanisms, and the value systems that we support there. So here's my newest, smartest person that I've been listening to. This is Bob DeVries. He'll give you a little bit of his background and a little bit of information about political things.
Thanks, Gail. Yeah, as Gail said, my name is Bob DeVries. I work as a lobbyist and from GCSI. Some of you in Washtenaw County may be familiar with our firm. Two of my colleagues live in Washtenaw County, Kirk Profit and Gary Owen. We represent a lot of Washtenaw County clients, including Washtenaw County itself. And so happy to work with you guys through the pool. And so I'm the lobbyist for the pool. What I primarily do on behalf of the pool is just build relationships with legislators so that when we find we have a legal liability, there's more than one way to deal with it. A lot of times Adam goes to court and tries to use the law to our advantage to say we don't have liability. Sometimes he goes to court and tries to convince the court to reinterpret or even change a law. And sometimes it's my job to go and say, well, you know what, this law is going to continue to give us liability or going to continue to cause us money. And so it's my job to go to the legislature and talk to them about our issue and see if we can get the law changed. And so it's just one more tool for how we can keep your costs low and your refunds big through our work in Lansing. But one other thing we're doing is just kind of acknowledging that road commissions are political bodies. And so in a lot of places they're elected. I know that you guys are appointed, but ultimately you need to have political effectiveness in order to continue to be effective. This probably is not as big of a deal for a large and professional organization like Washtenaw County Road Commission, but a lot of our members are quite a bit smaller, and they're run by commissioners that don't have the same level of political sophistication sometimes. And so what we just do is talk about where those liabilities might be. Adam helps you with your legal liabilities, but there's more than one kind of liability. And so, Commissioner Green had talked just a minute ago about what the personal liabilities might be on a civil side, but that's not the only type of personal liability you could potentially face. As we've seen in recent prosecution stuff coming out of the Flint water crisis, doing a bad job at your job as a public servant, can potentially lead to criminal charges. And so that's not a thing that people have thought of much before this Flint water thing. But I mean, there's two very nebulous statutes out there that in theory, whether you're an elected or an appointed official or whether you're an employee of the government, could cause you potential liability. And that's the felony of misconduct in office, which is not defined in statute. It's just something that if a jury believes that you've been convicted of, or you've committed misconduct in office, you can be charged with that felony, or convicted of that felony, I should say. And the other one is a misdemeanor called willful neglect of duty. And so there is more than one type of personal liability, and this is one that our Attorney General recently has shown that she's willing to charge people with. And now we see out of Macomb County, the new prosecutor over there, launching investigations into the current governor over COVID-related things. And so I'm not sure if this is going to be a new trend, but if it is, it's certainly something that everybody should be aware of. Things that could trigger that sort of thing. I mean, I tend to think that as a political body, you're only effective if you're really focusing on what your duties are. And political liabilities can be thought of as liabilities, can be thought of as scandals. I mean, that's what people would call them, sometimes. But if you're dealing with those things, then you're having a hard time dealing with what your job is to set policy and help keep the roads in great shape. But in some other counties we've had issues with, maybe the road commissioners' roads are the first ones to get plowed. That's maybe a small thing, but it's also potentially the type of thing that, social media fodder, and all of a sudden you need to start explaining how it gets chosen that this road gets plowed before that road, or this road gets fixed before that road, et cetera. Or how do your contracts get awarded? If somebody found out that, the brother-in-law of every road commissioner has a plowing contract or a paving contract, like those are problems. And whether they're legal problems or not would be up to somebody else to decide. But there's certainly political problems that would minimize your effectiveness because you need to spend time dealing with that. We've had issues, in other road commissions where people post inappropriate things on social media, sometimes of a political nature, sometimes otherwise. But they get caught up in having to backtrack and explain and tell everyone why, as a public servant, they're making these types of statements. And once again, it just eliminates their effectiveness, at least for a period of time, and often will end up with them needing to step back from their duties. So that's kind of the basis of what I needed to talk about. There's not a ton. Obviously, we're not here to address like an incident that happened in Washtenaw County, but we are here with a variety of resources. Can always help. If you do have a problem, we're only a phone call away, and can certainly help in any way you need. Happy to answer any questions.
May I ask one?
Commissioner Green, please.
Yes, thank you. This may not be your expertise, but in the event that one of our commissioners are charged with a felony misconduct or a misdemeanor willful neglect of duty, does the self-insurance pool protect us or represent us, or are we on our own?
I'll defer that one to Gail.
Oh, yeah. No, I think you're on your own with those. We will step in and do everything we can to protect the road commission. And so you would probably be out there all on your own. The pool was designed, we don't pay fines, we don't pay penalties. That's sort of why we're here. Bob and Adam and I come around to help you understand what is your job, what are your obligations, what are you expected to do? And that's sort of where we are trying to help you learn. But if you wander out into the world of criminal wrongdoing, I'm not even, Adam, have you ever done criminal? Have you? No.
Not really. No, I mean, conceivably, I could get you the name of somebody good.
But we will step in, and if that ever does happen, as a matter of fact, we had a commissioner step down about a week ago. Wasn't it, Adam? It seems like it was just last week. And he had gotten arrested. And so he talked to the staff at the road commission and the county board and decided rather than making it a road commission duty, he simply stepped down, and he's going to resolve his personal issues on his own. You are innocent until proven guilty, though. So if you are charged with even gross negligence as a staff person, we provide a defense. We don't cover gross negligence, that's a criminal act, but we do give you a defense if you're doing it during work hours until you're convicted, and then just cut you loose. I don't know what I tell you. Go ahead.
As well, you give us, you take the opportunity to educate us on risk assessment and things we can do to lower our exposure? We do that, and we'll come straight in right away and actually talk to people who are struggling with that. But furthermore, because we're a pool, we will anonymize it a little bit. We'll take all the personal details out, and we will share your experience with your neighbors as well. But they won't hopefully be able to tell it was where it came from. So if we come to you with something like this, it could be because, for instance, Bob talking about political issues, it could be because we watched one of our road commissioners up north totally squander all of his political capital and personal, I don't know, reputation in a very silly way. And there are things that you might decide are worth, but I don't think he really understood what he was doing. And so what Bob's here to help you understand is that political capital matters. It not only matters to you personally, but it matters to the other 4 people on your board. And it matters even more to your road commission because you have, how many people do you have working there now, guys? 140?
Around that, yes.
120 to 130.
130. And so, you know, those 130 people are depending on you to help them do a good job so they can feed their families and feel good about their work. And that is up to the 5 of you to maintain your political capital so that it is used in a way that supports their work. And so if you find yourself going sideways or having problems as a group, you know, talk to your managing director. Cheryl will bring in help for you. And learn the rules, learn where your place is and how to support the people. And then save your political capital. And if you have a legal question, call me. I have Adam. I can get a hold of him. The last time we needed him, it was on I think it was late on a Thursday night, wasn't it? Or a Wednesday. And he was in the middle of preparing for depositions on another case even. It wasn't even a road commission deal. And he came out of a locked up conference room and did some personal help and vetted some statements. We will step in right away if you are in the middle of a problem to help the road commission board. So if one of you starts walking around upside down, listen to your friends.
One other thing to mention just on that, the personal liability piece is that there's very little precedent established yet through the court system for what those crimes even mean. However, these things get resolved in Flint will help us understand more what the future of these things might be. And so when that's done, it might not be a bad idea to just kind of review how these cases were resolved and see if there's maybe a little bit more information that we can use then to protect you. Because, you know, I'm a lawyer as well. I don't do it every day like Adam does. But when you hear of a thing like willful neglect of duty, well, to me, what that makes me think is, well, you got to understand what your duty is. And so it starts with that. Misconduct in office is even more vague. But as we start to see these charges resolved one way or another in the Flint cases, we'll have a little bit more of an understanding of how judges across the state and how prosecutors across the state feel about them. And we can find a way to make sure that you don't accidentally step into those areas.
Commissioner Yamas, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I understand us as policymakers and reviewing policies, I would imagine. But I wanted to ask the example of, I know that somebody, I was maybe listening on a McChrysip where there was a commissioner who had posted on their Facebook page some untasteful, racist things. So in that case, does it put the commission in jeopardy, or how is that handled? Because I know that we should be responsible about our social posts and or how we act on social media, as we are the face of the commission. In that case, did that put the commission in trouble, or was that individually him? He became liable.
Yeah, I don't think in either case it made anyone liable. What it did is it put the commission in turmoil. It made the commission ineffective for a period of time. It made the staff feel like their leadership was missing. And so that's what we're talking about. A lot of what I'm talking about is not about making sure you don't get sued or about making sure you don't get charged with something. It's about making sure you're continuously effective at all times. And so in that case, the one that Gail mentioned up north, I think it's what you're talking about too, Commissioner. There was a period of time where the commission was just in turmoil, and the commission wasn't in a position where they could effectively make a decision about something because everything was about this one commissioner that did a dumb thing. And then the commissioner kind of doubled down on his statements. And then it took several more days for the commissioner to be convinced to resign. And then once the commissioner resigned, obviously the appointment process for his replacement, was about what happened. And so there was a significant extended period of time where this was the thing that road commission had to deal with, instead of dealing with setting policy and reviewing policy and supervising, what needs to be supervised. And so there was to my knowledge, no legal liabilities of any kind that came out of that. But it was just significant in terms of sidetracking the mission of the road commission.
Right, and that's the one I pulled Adam out of his meeting for. So the road commission came out immediately and said, this isn't the road commission, this is about that person. And so they tried to mitigate it. However, it was kind of all over them, as Bob said. And so they wanted to issue a statement, and we said, please, what do you want to say? And that's what Adam helped them put out, a very brief statement saying this isn't about the road commission. There is an employer liability for discrimination, and it could have been termed that way. Very likely could have gone farther if they would have mishandled the PR afterwards. As Bob said, they became about trying to stop this mess that one person created out of a thoughtless comment on an open mic. It was even prior to the meeting being called to order. So everyone was characterizing it, trying to stay away the distance. I will tell you, we were fortunate. It did stop bothering the road commission the following Monday, only because the county board decided they were going to make a policy statement about racism at the county level, and they botched that so badly that they took the attention off the road commission. Adam should have looked at their statement too. So I think there's a lot of people trying to do what they think is the right thing, but they got caught. But it was, by the way, the chairman, Barb, the chairman of that road commission got about 600 phone calls in one afternoon. CNN, MSNBC, they got a picture of this former commissioner in the Russian newspapers with a write-up. So people all know that particular county now by that, and it's not what you want. That's not what you want. Your words matter, and you need to be careful. But,
so I have one more question. So you referenced a situation where there was some turmoil, discrimination within the administrative staff. So if there is issue among the administrative staff, they would not come to us, they would come to you? If there's an initial complaint, if somebody has a complaint?
If someone's going to file a harassment complaint, they have to follow the personnel policies. And generally, if it's upper level staff and it involves the managing director, it will go to the commissioners. The commissioners are the ones that contacted me. And then I found one of our attorneys that has nothing to do with that road commission. He knows no one there. And so he is currently doing an investigation, and we will get a report. There's a standard for doing that, right, Bob and Adam? There's a standard for investigating those kinds of complaints. I was also told by the NAACP that if they didn't like how I was doing it, they would sue us. So I'm pretty sure we're fine, but the best part about using your insurance company to do that and not hiring your own attorney to do those investigations is that if you get it, it's subject to FOIA and Open Meetings Act issues. If it comes to the pool, it's mine, and I don't have to release it. We are not subject to FOIA. So we can protect all of the employees in this big argument because they're all probably great employees that are just having an issue. The attorneys know how to present the information in a way that the board would then be able to act on it. We've done this several times. I hate to say it, but we're getting pretty good at it. So, but we're here to help you. What we're trying to do is keep your road commission stable, because the first thing that happens to a road commission that can't do their job is their roads go all to hell, and those are the big expensive issues.
Right.
So keep it strong.
Thank you.
Commissioner McCollum or Doug's AOL. Commissioner McCollum, did you have any questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. This is our new training. You're the second. I think we're even better this time, don't you guys? Did we do better? Bob, Adam? But thank you so much. It helps us to be able to know, first of all, who you are. I never get to go anywhere anymore. So it's nice to meet you all that I haven't met before and to see all of the others again. And hopefully you can stay safe, and maybe COVID will go away someday soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming today. I really do appreciate you sharing the information. Staff relies very, very heavily on MCRISP, whether it's from the training so that we stay out of trouble, hopefully, and have fewer phone calls to Gail. It's invaluable to our organization, and it comes whether it's on the liability side and the road defects, or if it comes from the personnel side. I know Nicole works very closely as well, trying to set up different types of training through the human resource component of it. The training is invaluable, and we really do appreciate that. We try to make our phone calls few. I think the last one, when I called and said, I don't even know how this one happened. This isn't even our road, Adam. It's like, oh my goodness. But we do still occasionally get sued when it is not even our road. And again, knowing that we can make that phone call and that we have good representation and someone's going to take care of that for us, again, that's invaluable to staff. And then as we're navigating new waters here, it's also very important to keep all of that that in mind as well. There's we have a new board, and for the roles here, it's very new for each of you, and you've had to learn under sort of tumultuous situation with COVID here. It's been a brave new world. And speaking of COVID, a special call out to Gail on that. Throughout this entire pandemic, she has been just a huge help. I mean, for me personally, I actually have called and texted Gail during odd hours and have said, oh my goodness, this just came down and it's effective Monday morning, now what? And she has always responded. Just with general support, and then with whatever information she can possibly find at that particular point in time. So I am very grateful to Gail and to Macrissa, but to Gail personally for all of that assistance over the past year. It really has meant a lot.
Well, thank you. I love that you guys let us be part of your road commissions. We feel like we're the back room in 75 road commissions, so you don't have to have so many lawyers wandering around. I kind of like them, but I appreciate the opportunity, and it's really nice to see you. And Matt, I think I'll see you on Thursday, right? All right. Doug, did we do all right? Are we going to be okay? Can I keep my job?
Yes, you may. Did you get my letter?
I did. Thank you. You actually sent me a real one, so I appreciate it.
Okay.
We will share that. He's up for re-election, so you guys keep an eye out for the ballot.
Dale, when should we expect the ballot?
They don't come out until we have all the letters of candidacy coming in, and then I think our May meeting, the board approves the ballot, so they'll come out the end of May, and then our meeting where they're counted is in July. So it's a long process that takes a while, but hopefully everybody gets a chance to look at it.
Thank you. I'm just looking ahead to contemplate which agenda we need to dedicate room for putting that ballot together or for us to weigh in. So thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. I think it'll probably be the first part of June. So maybe your first June meeting.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
Right after
Appreciate
Memorial Day.
Yep. Take care, guys.
Thanks.
And if you need us, holler. Cheryl's got my number.
Thank you to all three of you. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else, Cheryl?
No, I believe that concludes our agenda.
All right. If there's nothing further from any of the commissioners at this point, last call. We have 30 minutes, 45 minutes.
No, we don't.
Understood. Understood. May I have a motion to adjourn this working session, please?
Certainly.
motion-
I'd be happy to provide a motion. I move that we adjourn the working session.
Second.
Thank you, commissioners. All those in favor say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed?
Commissioners, I'm sorry, it needs to be a roll call vote.
Oh, thanks, Emily. Okay, Carrie, hello.
Hi. Hang on 1 second here. Okay, Commissioner Doug Fuller,
Doug Fuller votes yes.
Commissioner Rod Green,
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Gloria Yamas,
Yes.
Commissioner Joanne McCollum,
Yes.
and Commissioner Barb Fuller.
Yes. We are adjourned. See everybody at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.